Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And we're continuing our discussion on passive design techniques. In this video, we're going to talk about passive solar and solar shading. What's passive solar? What does this word mean? Well, it turns out it's the idea of using the energy of the sun to heat your building. There's a difference between active solar and passive solar. Active solar is going to involve mechanical devices like the solar panels shown here. Passive solar has no mechanical devices. It's going to instead rely on natural heat transfer processes. This includes convection, conduction, and radiation. All passive solar systems are going to work by using the heat of the sun when you need it and keeping that heat out when you don't. Okay? Most of them use the same solar angles that we just discussed in the last video. All right. In the summer, the sun is higher in the sky, and so we can exclude it by designing for that angle. And in the winter, the sun is lower in the sky. We can allow it into our building. There's 5 major elements of most passive solar designs. Let's take a look at this illustration here, because the first one is an aperture. All right, and that's the word for the way that we let the energy of the sun into our building. It's usually a large glass area. An absorber, in this case, would be the floor surface here, right, is a dark surface that allows the next element, the thermal mass, to soak in that solar energy. So talking about that thermal mass, in this case, it is the like a concrete floor slab underneath our absorber surface. All right, it is a material, a building material that will retain or store the heat that is produced by the sun and has entered your building. Next is the distribution method, and this is where the differences between the different types of passive solar come in. All right, it's the method in which we circulate the heat from where it's stored to where people want it. All right. And finally, there's a control element here. In this example, it's this overhang here. And these are ways that we allow the sun in when we want it and keep it out when we don't. The simplest control element is a window overhang, but there are definitely other options. Let's talk about the 3 major types of passive solar design. And they are direct gain, indirect gain, and isolated gain. Starting over here with direct gain, this is where the sun passes directly into the living space of the building where your occupants are, all right, and is distributed that way. The benefit of this particular system is that it is the simplest way, all right, to achieve the same goal. But the downfall is that you get severe temperature fluctuations, all right, because your heat is entering directly into the living space. Moving on to our middle option here, indirect gain. This is an option where the heat is collected by an intermediate element. In this case, we're showing the most common choice, which is a trombe wall. Right? So the heat hits this element, stores the heat as it slowly heats up, and then later will radiate that heat into the living space. Right? The benefit of this is that there is a time delay so that the hottest part of the day, maybe the afternoon, the sun is hitting this indirect element, all right, but the heat is not transferring directly into the space. It waits as it slowly trickles through and collects that heat, all right, and then releases it later at night when it's needed. On the right, we have our last category of passive solar design, and that's called isolated gain. And in this design, the space that is heating up, all right, and providing the heat to your main living space is separate or isolated from your main living space. And the most common way to do this is to build a sun space. And so that's what we're showing here. You can see that in this design, this sun space right here is going to collect the heat, all right, which is then transferred or circulated into the main space. And you can do that with vents right here. And so there's a little bit of manual intervention to open and close the vents when you need the heat, all right? Or you can add a small fan to help circulate that heat through the living space. All of these different types of passive solar designs involved a control element. Remember that one? And we call this solar shading. There's different types of shading devices, but they all shield your windows or your apertures from direct sunlight. This both reduces glare, which is great for daylighting, all right, and it reduces solar heat gain, which is important for your passive solar designs during the summer. Right? It's important to design your solar shading with respect to their orientation and relative to the direction of the sun. It's also better to place your solar shading outside of your building envelope. All right. You can bring them inside, but it's better to put them outside so that the heat never enters your building. Finally, solar shading is a great design element for its visual qualities also. Pattern, texture, rhythm, shadows, they all can be achieved with solar shading. So let's take a look at some of the solar shading techniques, starting with horizontal shading devices. And the simplest one, take a look at the left, is just a horizontal overhang. These are really useful and effective for southern orientations. You can do some variations on this horizontal overhang by adding or using louvers, either just vertical or slanted. As we move to the east and west sides of a building, the horizontal overhangs don't help as much because you're getting low angle sun in the early morning and late afternoon hours. And so you end up using vertical louvers. And so that can look like something like this, all right? Or you can combine the horizontal and the vertical elements. It can look like an egg crate design. That's what this one is called. Right? You can see that it's got horizontal and vertical elements. Or it can look something like this, where you've got a horizontal overhang and some vertical elements here. Thanks, everyone. We've just covered passive solar design strategies and some different ways to do solar shading.